I say Pelletier, but I've been told I say it wrong. So
Okay, I'm probably going to say that wrong immediately.
Pelletier.
Hey, it's me, Mark, bringing you an exclusive interview with Paul Pelletier, the artist of G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero 306, which was released on the 15th of May 2024. In today's episode, myself and Tim will be talking to Paul about his experience of G.I. Joe growing up, a more general sweep of his career in comics, and how it feels to be working on G.I. Joe, his approach to the project, and how different it is to other work, and what his future is with G.I. Joe. We talk broadly about the experience of working on ARAH 306, and we discuss some of the contents, but focusing mostly on Skybounds' previously revealed preview promotion, so like the first 3 pages. We generally avoid to any particular spoilery content, I would say. In this episode, my mic did play up a little bit, so we'll see how much of that remains once I've worked my editing magic. But in the meantime, here is a specially commissioned song by none other than Phil Collins to introduce us all to Paul Pelletier. 5 issues in, it feels so right. Mooney Hands-On was a real delight, but drawing comics is so hard. Those monthly deadlines fly on by. Now there's one Paul who's filling in. Keep things ticking over for Chris's return. This is a book that keeps on going. It's a new artist, but don't you cry. Pelletier's on the art. Pelletier's on the art. For this issue and for several more. Wow, how's about that? Phil Collins there with the song from Zartan, the animated musical, all about our guest today, Paul Pelletier, who is joining us on the back of drawing G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero 306, which came out the week of recording, 15th of May 2024, and we will be talking to him all about the creative process around that issue and the route that led him to that place. Now, if you don't know Paul, he is an American comic book penciler who got started professionally all the way back in 1992 on Malibu's X-Mutants. And he has gone on to have extensive work in comic books from Marvel, DC, and even a stint on CrossGen. Perhaps he is best known for a long run on the Aquaman book, but most importantly for us, he is starting a 5-issue run on A Real American Hero with 306, and he joins us today. But I will not be talking to him alone. I will, of course, be joined, as always, by the man, the legend, the Real American Tim Finn. Greetings, Tim.
Hi, Mark, and listeners and viewers, and here's our guest.
Welcome, Paul.
hello.
Good to have you on.
Happy to be here.
Paul, where are you joining us from today?
I live in Maine, so yeah, I live in outside of the Bath Brunswick area of Maine, kind of mid coast. So that's and sitting kind of in my basement studio. So.
We are speaking in May, so late spring, early summer, and it's convention season. Do you attend a lot of conventions? Do you travel to particular conventions?
I don't do too many conventions. I mean, if I'm invited to them, I'm more than happy to go. But I'm so busy with deadlines half the time that I need that break away from comics. But I should be at the Heroes Con in Charlotte, North Carolina in June. And the week before then, I'm doing a small show in Albany, New York, which is a lot of fun. So usually I usually have friends that like Ron Mars and Bart Sears go to that small show, so it's always fun to see them again. But as far as right now, that's pretty much what's on my table. Then I'm gonna be busy with the GI Joe stuff, and there's a couple other potential projects that might be sneaking in there too. So there's a lot of drawing in my future, so which is a good thing. It's better than no drawing at all.
Okay, you just said sneaking in. Is that to say that the GI Joe schedule may have a gap or gaps, or is that to say that you can sometimes draw more than 20 pages a month? How is that scheduling working out?
A little of both. A little of both. That's the problem when working freelance. Sometimes jobs will overlap, and either I adopt Jack Kirby powers and be able to draw like 30 pages in a couple weeks. But I believe there will be a little bit of a gap on GI Joe. If I remember correctly, I'm slated to draw 5 issues, and then I believe Chris Mooneyham is going to be picking up again afterwards. So there will be a little bit of a gap. I'm just about wrapped up my third issue with 308.
Hmm.
But yeah, so as far as what I can tell from the editor, Alex Antone, that he's been super happy with what I've been turning in. So it looks like there's a good chance there's going to be possibly more GI Joe stuff after my first 5 issues.
I'll try to maintain some professional dispassion as co-host of a podcast. I enjoyed your Flash issues when they came
Mhm.
out, and I remember thinking in the back of my mind, this would look good for GI Joe, and then jump ahead, Green Lantern and Aquaman, and hey, it's happening, and I was very excited with the announcement, and it's tough because Mooneyham's great and your work is great. And the only solution is that the book comes out twice a month.
Sure, you trying to kill us comic book artists? Trying to
I mean, a monthly for one of you and a monthly for another of you. It's in effect, in effect.
because I remember a few years back. Oh, what was it? Batman and Robin Eternal. I think that book came out weekly,
Right.
and just the amount of work that went into trying to organize that is like just insanity. So twice a month might not be quite as bad, but still.
I have heard indirectly from editors that I mean I think GI Joe fans and Marvel fans think back to the summers of '87 and '88 when like Amazing Spider-Man and GI Joe and Avengers and a couple and Wolverine ran bi-weekly for the summers, which was
Right,
a really fun way because kids were out of school or maybe they were visiting family or at the beach, a place with sort of more comics or different comics, and it was a way to sort of increase excitement and I think for the companies increase cash flow and profits. And
right.
what the readers never thought was just how hard that was on editorial and the letterer and the colorists and
Yep, yep. There's a lot of organizing that goes into these things, and I think sometimes the younger people that are interested in trying to get into comics don't quite realize that. It's like, yeah, well, it helps when you work that far in advance. At least three to 4 months before publication hits, and then it's different. Yeah, and time flies really fast when that happens. So,
I think it's a nice approach that they're taking where they're not just having a sticky plaster approach of having just these random fill-ins of 1 issue or 2 issues or whatever, but having these longer arcs by a single artist of 5 issues, which just makes for that consistency and a sort of a greater whole than the sum of the parts when it comes to it being reprinted. So it looks like the trade paperback is a much more satisfying package, etc. So I like that. I like that they're doing that.
right. Well, and I think originally I was supposed to come on for 3 issues. And then Alex, the editor, was like, "Well, if you could do 5, then we could fill a trade with just the 5 issues." So it's like, all right, well, because I had other offers to do some other stuff coming in on the side. So now it's time to knuckle down and try and get everything done on time so it comes out on time and complete those 5 issues.
I do want to say to editorial at Skybound, and I mentioned this in a letter I wrote to the letters page. No more
Mhm.
skip months, okay? As a fan, as a retailer, I own a comic book store. I'd like my GI Joe fix monthly with no breaks.
Right, right. Well, ideally, that's how it works,
Right.
but sometimes things happen, and yep, we try.
Uh, Mark, is this where we toss to you and you ask the talking Joe question?
Yeah, so this is where we ask you to rewind the clock, remember the days of your youth, and think back to what sort of role G.I. Joe played in those early years.
Well, I mean, of course, growing up, I'm 54, so right in the '80s, that's the exact time when the cartoon was out and stuff. So I was familiar vaguely with the cartoon. I always tend to, I always used to gravitate more towards superhero and fantasy and sci-fi and that stuff. So, but I was familiar with the cartoon for GI Joe. Never really bought the Marvel comics, so when Alex approached me to do the book, like, oh, I ran over to my local comic shop, picked up as many back issues as I could to try and familiarize. And then, of course, I picked up some of the latest issues with Chris's work, and just blown away at how beautiful his artwork is. So, I mean, I was not overly familiar with the GI Joe universe, but from what I remembered from the cartoons and that kind of deal.
Were you reading comics as a kid? And if so, where did you get them?
Let's see. When I was a kid, yeah, oh yeah, I got. I think it was like around 5th grade when a friend of mine introduced me to Marvel comics. I started out buying them at on drugstore racks, the spinner racks. It's kind of where I started out, and then found out, oh wow, there's actual comic shop in my town that I never knew about, and started buying from there. So, but yeah, I loved it was weird. I liked books like X-Men and stuff, but I also was attracted to certain artists. So I would follow the artist's career even more so than the characters themselves. So, John Byrne was probably the biggest influence on me when I was a kid. So, I was buying anything that he was working on. I think there was only one book that I used to buy that I didn't care who was drawing it, was Power Man and Iron Fist. But yeah, I used to buy off the old spinner racks in the drugstores, and then eventually move on to comic book shops.
Did you go to art school? Were self
No,
taught? Did you take classes? How did you learn to draw? How did you learn to draw comics?
I always loved drawing when I was a kid, but it was all stuff like dinosaurs and Charlie Brown and that kind of stuff. Until my friend, like in 5th grade, introduced me to Marvel Comics. I took a couple years of art in high school. And the funny thing is, my guidance counselor at the time was trying to steer me away from art classes, because she's like, "You're really good academically. Maybe you should do something else." Like, yeah, but I love drawing. So, but that was the extent of my art education. Pretty much I'm self taught. So, 30 plus years later, I'm still trying to figure out what I'm doing. So, it's a process.
So I believe that you started professionally in comics in 1992 with X Mutants from Malibu. So that's a comic that I remember flicking through previous catalogs and seeing when it got launched. And I think you might have even been doing some other books before then as well on top of your day job. So that was 1992, and we're all of these years later. So I think you've definitely got the experience that you're someone who knows what you're doing in comics.
But the funny thing is I'll look at someone like a Chris Mooneyham, or guys like Sean Murphy and stuff, and realize, oh man, it's like, as I think I've come a long ways in 30 plus years, but there's always something new to learn. There's always, you know, ways to up my game so I can try and keep up with some of these other artists. But yeah, and you're right. But the X Mutants was the first job I was able to quit my day job. I was cutting shoe leather in a shoe factory at that time, but that was the first job I was able to quit my day job and just start doing comics full time. And fortunately enough, I've stayed busy enough that 30 plus years later, I'm still doing it.
So GI Joe is a team book, and
Yes,
Negation,
it is. Yes, it is.
Negation, Superboy and the Ravers, Legion of Superheroes, Dark Stars, team books. But
Hmm.
She-Hulk, Green Lantern, Aquaman, Flash, solo books.
Right.
Are there different decisions that you're making, or does that sort of, it's like already set up for in the script? Is there a different approach, or is it just sort of like pencil mileage?
Yeah. I mean, there is a different approach as far as if you have multiple characters in every panel, you have to keep in mind, well, these characters are probably saying something, so you got to leave room for word balloons and dialogue and all that kind of stuff. I always say it takes me a good, like when I was doing work on Aquaman, it took me a good probably 4 or 5 issues before I really felt comfortable with the characters and who I was drawing. So if you have a team book on top of it, it makes it that much more difficult because there's and a cast like GI Joe is insane how many characters there are, and not just the GI Joe characters themselves, the Joe characters, but you have Cobra and all the different kind of Vipers and all that kind of stuff to draw. So it's been kind of I won't say overwhelming, but it's been a test. It really has been a test. But the good thing is we have Diana Davis as our creative consultant, and she's been really good at making sure that I'm staying on top of the right designs and all that kind of stuff. So.
And presumably, you have not drawn a book before with this many specific accessories and weapons.
Mm-hmm. Yep, yep, and and to be perfectly honest, tech, hardware, all that kind of stuff is I never really considered to be one of my strengths. So when Alex first approached me about doing work on GI Joe, that's the first thing that popped up in my head. It's like, ugh, am I the right guy? Am I the right guy to be drawing this book? Am I the right guy to bring the proper approach and respect to the characters? And but fortunately, I mean, right before I started working on GI Joe, I had done 6 issues worth of. I was working with a video game company and doing a comic version of their property, and that entire book was like post-apocalyptic military, vehicles and weapons and stuff. So that kind of helped break me in a little bit to what I would have to draw in GI Joe. So it actually worked out pretty nicely.
Can you tell us what that video game property is?
Well, the company's called Lithos, Liithos. Originally, the book was called, or the game was called Ashfall, but it's changed to Trace War. They had a press release last year about it. I wish I could tell you how and where the books will be seen. I don't know if they're like in-game Easter eggs that you can find, entire issues inside the game itself. I don't know, but yeah, but I mean, and quite honestly, before that, I was working with the Cool Minis or Not, that CMON gaming company, and I did a graphic novel for them. So I spent the last 2 years working steadily, but I didn't have anything on the comic book shelves. So when Alex approached me about GI Joe, it's like, well, this is a good way to get my name back out there, back on the shelves again, and so people didn't think I just completely disappeared the last couple of years.
Alex, the editor, has come from DC. Did you work together there on various books?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if I remember correctly, Teen Titans was definitely one that we worked on together. But with Marvel and DC, the editorial would shift around so much that it's hard to remember exactly which projects we worked. But I'm pretty sure Teen Titans was one that we had worked on together.
What is it like to work from a Larry Hama plot, or how is it different than other writers you have worked with?
He definitely allows the artist to enough room to do their own thing. He's closer to the old school Marvel method, where it's kind of a loosely based plot. He doesn't supply all the dialogue. He just kind of gives you an idea of what the dialogue is going to be like, so that you have the proper expressions. So so that's been kind of refreshing, though. I mean, with GI Joe, there's, if I had to count, there are like multiple storylines going on at the same time. So there's a lot of jump scenes from one to, it's like every 3 pages or 2 pages, we're jumping to a different scene. So that can be challenging. But yeah, Larry, yeah, it reminds me more of a classic, Marvel method type plot.
So an issue of GI Joe, like one page will have a paragraph description, or one panel will have like a sentence or two or three telling you
Right.
what's going on with maybe some dialogue, but it's not necessarily broken down by panel. It's not necessarily broken down panel with specific word balloons as full scripts are.
Right. Well, that each, I mean, like if I printed out with, let's say, a 20-page plot, would probably fit on 4 or 5 pages printed out.
Hmm.
And he'll break down. He won't break down specific panels, but he'll have a sentence for each potential panel that would be going on the page. So, but yeah, as far as dialogue, there's no full dialogue. Just like I said, indications of what they might be talking about, just to get the right feel for the expressions and whatnot. But I mean, at the beginning of each plot, he makes sure that the whoever the artist is on the book knows that they have some creative freedom to change things around a little bit, and as far as pacing and that kind of thing. So it definitely gives the artist a little bit of freedom to mess around with it a bit, instead of, some writers are super detailed, you know describing everything that's going on in the panel and all the dialogue, and that's harder to stray away from, and kind of do your own thing a little bit with it. So I appreciate a little more of that freedom in a looser plot.
We talked a little bit about the specifics of the technology, and and your concern about that element, and ironically enough, this episode has got quite a specific focus on that sequence of Snake Eyes training, and
Hmm.
and kind of introducing his new loadout of weaponry.
Right.
I can imagine that you were given lots of detail of, like, make sure that you're using this specific machine gun and this pistol and all these.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, that's a challenge for me. It's not the kind of stuff I enjoy. More organic and free flowing stuff that's not so has to be so specific, hardware type stuff. There's a couple scenes towards the end of 306 where they're kind of in the jungle, on Cobra Island and stuff. That's the kind of stuff I like drawing, where there's yeah, where there's more plant life, more organic. That kind of stuff is a lot of fun to draw. But yeah, and then we get into the ferret, four wheelers and stuff, and it's like, all right, get used to drawing that kind of stuff. And it's the difficult part for me is drawing it once is one thing, drawing it over and over again, different angles, and getting the details right. That's where it gets kind of tedious. It was funny. I did a small show in Massachusetts last year. It was at Plastic City Con, and my table was right next to. I wish I could remember his name. He helped design a lot of the GI Joe character designs, the toy designs,
Figures or vehicles?
figures.
Ron Rudat or Mark Pennington or Kurt Groen?
It might be Ron.
Yeah,
It
Ron
might, it
Rudat did
might,
the first 7 years.
yeah, I think something like that. And I was joking with him. I mean, this was months before I got the call from Alex. So, but I was joking with him, looking at the designs. It's like, you're one of those guys that wants to drive comic book artists nuts because the the different parts of the costumes, all the belt buckles and pouches and all that kind of stuff. It's one thing to draw it once. It's another thing to have to draw it over and over again, different angles.
Sounds like you should draw a GI Joe story set in 1982 when all the costumes are much more streamlined and sort of look like jumpsuits, and there's a lot less bric-a-brac and straps
Yeah,
and armor plates. Um,
yeah. So it was funny that I was joking with him because he was looking at my page work and he was like, I couldn't do that kind of stuff. It's like, well, we all have our own strengths. But then, yeah, it was ironic that a few months later I got a call from Alex. Hey, you want to do some GI Joe work? It's like, oh no, this is gonna be a, it'll be a nice challenge. It'll force me to draw stuff that I normally wouldn't draw, but that's the only way I can get better at it is taking on that challenge.
And you came onto the book after a really well received run from Chris Mooneyham, and his art had all of this, grit to it. Um, Coming onto the book following a run like that, does that influence the way that you approached it at all?
Well, I mean, it actually kind of affected who I brought in as inker on the book because Tony Cordos, I worked with him a bit on Cyborg years back, and I knew he brings kind of a rougher edge to my pencils than what most inkers will use, like clean brush lines and whatnot. Tony brings a slightly rougher edge, and I figured that approach might actually work a little better trying to follow the Mooneyham stuff because Mooneyham's got that really cool kind of rougher edged inks to his work. And honestly, when I contacted Tony about doing work on GI Joe, he was super excited because he was a big GI Joe fan. So he's like, "Oh, this is a dream come true to be working on GI Joe."
oh,
So I figured, okay, I got the right guy then. So
I guess my initial thought is looking at your credits, you're very much a penciler.
mhm.
Why is it, do you think, that you're focused on pencils only rather than pencils and ink?
Because I'm a terrible inker. Honestly, a lot of people look at my pencils and they think basically I'm inking with a pencil, and that's because when I was a kid looking at comic books, I didn't realize that I was looking at finished inks, and I figured that's the way comic book artists work. They have to draw super tight. But yeah, inking is a whole different skill unto itself, and I admire the people that are really good at it because I mean they're not just tracing; they add line weights, they add texture. Even though a lot of it can be done in color nowadays, inkers can really separate foreground and background. So a decent inker can bring a lot to the page, and I enjoy seeing the different approaches people have had on my pencils. So but I've had a few people in the past say, "Well, why don't they just shoot from your pencils? They're tight enough that." And it's like, well, yeah, but I don't want to take work away from people, and I enjoy seeing what an inker can bring to the page. But yeah, it was cool when Tony was like super happy and geeked out about hey, I get to work on GI Joe, so this is really cool.
can you talk a little about color? You have drawn comics in an era with before computer colors or just as computer colors were coming in, so sort of traditional four color, flat color. You've drawn comics that have been colored in a with a light touch digitally, with a very aggressive sense of rendering. And then here on GI Joe, Francisco Segala has this sort of desaturated palette with
Mhm.
some textures. Can you talk about what you are interested in about color, or how your work, just as there have been different inkers, has looked or felt differently with different color artists?
Um, if I mean for me, I'm a big fan of Guillermo del Toro's movies, and his approach to color on screen is kind of what I like to see in comics. He'll do like really cool blues up front and reds in the background, so that there's a lot of like big contrast in his color sense. So for me, it's not about heavy rendering in colors. I want to see a colorist who just does high contrast, even like shadows on faces instead of like an airbrush look. I like hard cuts almost like cell animation, between light and dark. So I mean, the stuff I've seen from Francesco so far, I love the approach because he was saying he wants to try to get a little bit of a old school feel with new school technology, and I think the stuff is looking really nice.
Yeah, if I can just riff on that for a moment, because I think our listeners may like that idea, but not know quite what it means. To me, it's these dot screens and these desaturated colors, which
Yep.
on bright white glossy paper have a brightness that is more like looking at comics 30 years ago on newsprint.
Right. Right.
And the easiest comparison is GI Joe comics 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago at IDW, which had a lot of bright colors and rendering on bright white paper compared to the new book,
Right.
sort of the like loudness and quietness of it.
Yep. Yep. No, I love the approach. Ever since the relaunch with well, not the relaunch, but Skybound taking over publication and image, the approach has been really really solid. I really like what they're doing with it. But yeah, it's amazing with more technology, coloring has come more and more to the forefront, whereas inkers are kind of pushed back a little bit. And it's like, well, yeah, I prefer the black and white artwork to try and be as strong as possible, so it doesn't have to rely on a colorist to really, bring stuff forward. So I prefer it to be as strong as possible in black and white first.
Your work, if published just in black and white, would still be totally legible, and it sort of hangs in a balance and is satisfying. And there are some penciler and inker combinations where it's really waiting for the color
Right. Right.
to not just enhance it, but to finish it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Because I think, yeah, nowadays you see, I mean, it's not everybody, but there are some really open line work, artwork now where you need the color to really fill in the gaps and make stuff look more solid and, like you said, finish the artwork. But I mean, I guess if you have a good relationship with the colorist you're working with and it works, I mean, I guess it's the finished product that's what everybody sees. So, it depends on like for me, I I don't do anything digital. It's all pencil on paper. So, and I sell artwork afterwards. So I want it to look as strong as possible, you know, on the paper itself. So,
Is Tony Cordos inking on blue line scans from your
right.
pencils? Okay, you're not
Yeah.
shipping the original pencil art.
No, no, because that gets expensive after a while, and he was perfectly fine with yeah, and plus he lives down in Florida, so yeah, it saves time just sending him scans, and you can get to work on it right away.
So a collector could buy your original pencils or his original inks. They're
Correct.
all out there.
Yep.
And will the original pencils be going out up on your site at some point?
Yes. I've already had a few people contact me. It's like I was amazed just the fact that people were contacting me without actually seeing any of the artwork from the book. So it's like, wow, okay, that's pretty cool that there's such a fan base for GI Joe that they would be interested in buying artwork sight unseen. So the closest thing I can think of to that kind of a fan base is I just did a Cool Minis or Not. The gaming company is doing a Zombicide crossover with the Turtles, and I did a San Diego exclusive comic book with the Turtles for that Zombicide special. So at the same time, I was working on Turtles and GI Joe, and it's like, yeah, the fan base is very similar. They're very very, I don't want to say hardcore, but they're really into their characters. So I'm sure once that San Diego book comes out, I'll probably get people, the Turtles fans, saying, "Oh, I want to buy some artwork from it." So it's cool. It's really nice to see, that kind of that passion for certain books like that.
And speaking of art on your website, you've published a number of kind of these character spotlight pieces up there. Can you maybe talk about the origins of those? Was it an exercise in trying to get a handle on these characters?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times the pinups I do on my site, it's just stuff I do in between, just kind of for fun. And the GI Joe pieces work kind of trying to get used to the characters a little bit, and knowing that I started doing those after the word came out that I was going to be on the book. So I figured, what the heck, practice drawing the characters a little bit, throw them up on the site, and hopefully people are interested in checking them out. And yeah, they sold pretty quickly. So, but yeah, it's just kind of fun stuff that for the most part the story is so dense in the comic that I don't really get a chance to open up and just do pin-up shots in the book itself of the characters. So it's been fun.
Do you miss drawing covers? How do you feel in terms of the monthly workload of interiors and covers, or sort of your name as a marquee, interiors, covers?
Um, Covers. I mean, that's always nice to do a cover every once in a while, just because that's the first thing people see on the book. But quite honestly, I enjoy storytelling. I enjoy doing page work, and covers sometimes for me are difficult in that I'm trying to tell a story in one image, and that's where I bog down. I'm not thinking design. I'm not thinking something that just looks cool. And I want to tell a story on the cover. So that's where, as nice as it is to do covers every once in a while, I actually really enjoy doing page work. So, and honestly, on the GI Joe covers, Kubert stuff is fantastic. So it's like, no, there's no argument there. So
Did you notice a difference when is it 10 years back? Monthly comics went from 22 pages to 20. Do you still notice a difference in sort of how a story might flow or breathe, or how your monthly workflow goes?
I mean, granted, it's a little easier because it's less pages.
Right.
But I mean, when I was first working, was it Outsiders, early '90s or mid '90s for DC? I think those were 24 pages each. So I think part of it is probably finances too for the companies.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, let's cut back the pages. We don't have to pay quite as much, and because I know over the last 10 years, if someone I met, didn't know I was working in comics and they find out I worked in comic books, they were like, oh boy, things must be really good since you got the movies and the TV shows. And it's like, no, not really. I mean, the movies are doing great. The TV shows, conventions are going gangbusters. The only part of the industry that's not doing quite as well is the comics industry itself. I think there are so many entertainment options for people now that comics kind of take the back seat a little bit. So yeah, so as much as nerd culture has really exploded, the actual comic books are like, not quite as strong as you would think they would be.
Maybe you got to get into young adult graphic novels or graphic novels for kids, because that's a big growth market at bookstores.
Yep. Yeah, for some reason the comics industry got kind of stagnant and really did not try to figure out ways to draw in younger readers constantly and refurbish the readership in comics. It just seemed like the readership was just getting older and older and older instead of trying to draw in a younger crowd. But it's tricky. I mean, anything with the arts, it gets difficult when you're trying to commercialize it and bring in an audience. People like what they like, and if you give them even more options for entertainment, sometimes some part of the media take a back seat. So it's I don't envy the people running these companies trying to figure out ways to bring in more of an audience. It's difficult.
Bit of a left turn into back to GI Joe, but I was just
Okay.
wondering about this particular issue. If there was, yeah, it's interesting you say that. Often with the way that Larry Hama structures these issues, it is scene to scene. You know, you've got a couple of pages of one scene and one location, and then you're cutting away to another location and another kind of subplot. So, out of some of all of these sequences, was there one that was most fun to tackle, and or any that were particularly challenging for you?
Uh, I mean, the opening sequence was fun because it was one character with Zartan. So, so that kind of stuff, that can be fun. I don't know. I think part of it is the difficult parts were when I would look at what Chris Mooneyham had done before, and trying to maintain that level of quality. I think it's like, oh, this kind of looks okay, but I could do it a little better to try and match up with the quality. One of the nice compliments I got when I first started working on the book was Diana Davis emailed me and she goes, "Wow, you must have been a big GI Joe fan when you were younger." And it's like I wasn't, but I mean, thank you for the compliment because she was really happy with the way the pencils were turning out. It's like, well, I like to think of myself as being a professional. No matter what job I'm on, I'm going to try and put my best foot forward, try and keep up the quality of the book that had come before. And but yeah, I think there were so many characters in GI Joe, and the way, like you said, like how Larry writes, it's hard to, for me at least, to really get comfortable with certain characters because it jumps around so much. So it's kind of like overloading all together at once and trying to, I don't know, try to ease my way into the characters. So I'm sure, let's say I draw like 10 issues of the book. I'm sure when you look at issue 10 versus issue 1, I'm sure there's going to be characters that I had modified or got used to drawing so they don't look exact. I mean, it's the same character, but my approach might be a little different because I finally gotten comfortable with how to draw them and just all the little nuances. Because I mean, some of the characters too, learning the personalities that can lead into body language and facial expressions. And when you don't really know who they are at that point, it changes over time how you approach it.
I think about the anxiety that young artists have, like seventh graders and eighth graders, and also people in their teens and 20s, because I have taught kids of different ages, and to see a kid at that sort of range before they have more skills or confidence, when they're confronted with a blank page, you see them sort of like, it's like a seventh grader like wants to get it right, and they sort of won't start. It's like, do you have a ruler? It's like, you don't need a ruler. That's not what you need right now. Just start drawing. Just draw a circle. It's like, I want it to be perfect. It's like, just draw a rock, just draw a blob, draw a cloud.
Mhm.
And I have thought about professionals who have said this kind of thing, like, oh, it took me a couple issues to sort of warm up. And I remember when I was younger and reading comics that didn't make sense. And I sort of put these two ideas together because if you, every 3 pages of a series of a crowded and busy series like this, have to draw all new things, it's not like you're paralyzed by the blank page like that seventh grader is who like wants to draw superhero comics, but you sort of take an extra moment every time. You might like, well, maybe this character should be holding the weapon like this, or like, are they standing too close together, are they friends, are they lovers, or well, how antagonistic is this, all the sort of, it's like 500 micro decisions. And then also like, oh, right, this guy's got 2 bandoliers. Well, wait, do you see them on the back? Oh, they combined. It's his suspenders become a one suspender in the back. And it
Right.
ends up taking longer, but also there's what I imagine is a little bit of a mental fatigue. It's like, okay, every 5 minutes I have to make a tiny decision. And by the end of the day, I've drawn a page with 5 or 6 panels with 3 or 5 characters and 2 vehicles and 7 different weapons, and they're in a specific headquarters. And also, like, okay, the previous artist drew the headquarters like this. Are they in this part of the room or that part of the room? And it's sort of like, you're a professional, you handle it, you do it, but it sort of like bogs you down as it goes. And by your third or fourth or fifth issue, you just do it. It's like, oh no, Duke and Scarlet would stand this close together. Duke and
Right.
Scarlet and Snake Eyes would stand this close together.
Uh-huh. I've run into, like, my local comic shop. A friend of mine does a class for drawing comics for kids, and he's had me in a couple of times. And what I try to explain to a lot of them, it's like, I don't think they realize, looking at a comic book, how much work goes into it. And for me, I always tell them, drawing a comic book story, it's all about problem solving. That's all it because there's so many things that you have to think about when drawing a decent story, that, like you said, mental fatigue can kick in, because it's all problem solving, and not just drawing your characters consistent from panel to panel, but what angle are you using, what space are they occupying in the scenery, drawing the scenery consistent over and over again, drawing costumes consistently over and over again. It's just a constant exercise in problem solving. So I think sometimes people think drawing comic books, they see a cover and that's what they think is, well, that's drawing comic books. Like, no, storytelling, the actual page to page, there's a lot of work and goes into that. And I tell the younger, artists, it's like, unless you decide to write your own stuff, be prepared to be drawing a lot of stuff you don't necessarily like to draw, because that's common. It's not all splashes of characters. You got to draw interiors of rooms. You got to draw ordinary, everyday stuff that normally you wouldn't think of when drawing comics. But then when you have to do it, it's like, oh, okay, this is a little more difficult than I thought it was going to be. So, that's like, jumping back to GI Joe, with the way Larry writes, it jumps around so much. It's like, okay, well, I'm done thinking of this scene. Now I got to think of this scene, and solve all the problems that are involved in this other scene. So there's a lot of, at least for me, there's a lot of thinking that goes along when drawing a comic book. I mean, some people, it might come to them a lot easier than others, but for me, yeah, it's problem solving.
Talking of problem solving and drawing complicated things, I'd like to just tip my hat to the 3djoes.com website, which is a true friend to not just collectors to see the full details of all of these old toys, but also to the comic creators that have to draw them, because now you can go on to, for example, the Ferret webpage, and there's a 360-degree turnaround of those vehicles so that you can see them through every possible angle. And what a gift that must be to artists who nowadays are able to use that tool when they draw them.
Oh, I was saying, working with Diana, she was been fantastic with supplying reference materials. And people ask me, it's like, well, do they send you comics and stuff? It's like, no, a lot of times, like, Diana will send me like box art from the toys, and sometimes it's schematics on, like, the Ferret or his tanks and stuff. So you get an idea what they're going to look like from different angles and stuff. So yeah, my biggest problem was, like, every time I would draw a his tank, I'm terrible at lettering, and so I would turn in a page, and Diana's like, "Where's the number on the his tanks?" Like, oh, can the letterer do that? I'm terrible at lettering. Like, he's really on top of all that stuff, so that definitely helps out, because I think I probably would have snuck in some either wrong character designs or slightly off on some of the vehicles if she weren't there, kind of keeping track of, what the visuals are looking like. So she's been a big help.
I'm just turning to the page of issue 306 where I can spy a hiss on one particular page, and Spoiler, it's got on the side of it the number 788, and it looks like maybe that hasn't been hand drawn, but has been put in by some crafty letterer.
Yep.
Also, the Hiss tank is a gorgeous design. It's very hard to draw because it is a
Mhm.
very unusual shape, and I think its proportions sort of take you by surprise. It's like fan artists and wannabe budding GI Joe artists. If you're going to draw the Hiss, you got to warm up and practice that a
Yep.
bunch of times. Like, how tall is it? How forward is it? What's the angle on the front of the treads?
So forgive me if I don't get it exactly right right off the bat, but it's a process. So
Paul, this is more of a general art. This is not a GI Joe question. When you drew negation for CrossGen, were you
mhm.
one of the writer artist folks who moved to Florida?
Oh yeah, all of us pretty much
Okay.
on the main books. Yeah, we all worked out of the same studio.
All right. So right now you're drawing by yourself in your basement studio, and
Right.
and presumably before CrossGen, you drew by yourself in a room somewhere where you lived.
Yep.
And for those 3 years, 2 years,
Yeah, something like that.
you were in a studio, a shared
Right.
space, and I remember reading about it when it was happening and thinking it sounded great because it a reminded me of the sort of mythical and non-existent Marvel bullpen of the 60s.
Yeah, and that's exactly what Mark Alessio wanted to do with CrossGen. He had the bullpen in mind when people started telling him, like, that never actually existed.
It's like Stanley wrote about that, but
Right.
everyone was just free, everyone was coming into the city or coming into the building and dropping off their art. Um,
Right.
but it also reminded me of art school and having like junior year or senior year a room where I would go and my classmates were also working on their big projects.
Right.
So can you talk about being a creative person, being a comic book artist, working by yourself, working in a room with other people?
When I was first approached to join CrossGen, the idea scared the crap out of me, primarily because I was so used to working by myself. But even though the whole CrossGen thing crashed and burned spectacularly, I will never regret joining that crew because I look at the work I was doing in the '90s before CrossGen, and then what I started producing after CrossGen, and just those 3 years or so was such a learning experience for me. I think it really helped push me to be a better artist. Just being around the guys like the Steve Eptings and the Bart Sears and Scott Eatons and just Steve McNiven was there, or before he left, I got to share a quad with him for a year or so. Just being surrounded with Jimmy Chung. I mean, just being surrounded by the quality of artists and seeing what they were producing every day really helped push me to be a better artist. So yeah, for an experience that really scared me at first, it turned into an amazing learning experience. I think it really helped push me.
Am I remembering correctly? I feel like I read this. Was Bart Sears the arts director, and were there weekly or biweekly group critiques?
No, not really.
Okay.
Bart is a very, very relaxed person. So yeah, he was the art director, but it wasn't like cracking the whip because I mean, for the most part, the people that they brought in as artists were recommended by the writers that like the Ron Mars and Mark Wade's and Chuck Dixon's. So they were bringing people that they had worked with before that knew, okay, these guys are professional, they're going to get the work done. So as an art director for Bart, it was fairly easy because the people that they were bringing in were already established. You know, we're all established pros, but we were people that were kind of overlooked by the Marvels and the DCs. You know, so I think his job is fairly easy for the most part, and that it's like, yeah, okay, we know they're going to be taking care of their work. They're pros. They know what they're doing.
Yeah, very good. I think I used up all of my questions, so uh, I'm happy to release you back into the wild, Paul.
Well, I appreciate you guys having me on. Yeah, maybe it's the type of thing that once I get a couple more issues under my belt, and I know a little more about the story itself, because the sad thing is like there's so much going on in the book that if people would ask me, okay, describe what the plot is going on, it's like I don't know. There's so many things going on. So once I have a few issues under my belt, maybe I could do a little more, actual Joe specific questions.
Yeah, yeah, it would be great to. It's be great to check in, yeah, in a few months' time once we've seen, yeah, you've got a few more issues under your belt, and we can sort of.
And I'm hoping that the GI Joe fans appreciate what I'm doing. And like I said, it's not exactly like Chris's stuff, but hopefully the level of quality will be, you know, up to their standards.
I will hope that if you do another 5 issues or so, perhaps that can be a mini series off to the side with with a select cast of characters and fewer jumps to many, many locations with many, many other tiers of characters. And maybe it can all take place in the jungle or underwater or up in the sky with some more organic shapes. Maybe
They turn to each other and they say, "Who took all of our guns? What are we going to do?"
there's a line in the animated movie from 1987 where one character challenges the other characters to leave their weapons behind on a mission, and I think of that sometimes because sort of what that does to like the kid brain who's watching it, who's then going to play that scene, or like
Right.
the grown up who happens to walk by, or the animators who had a little less to draw for a couple of shots.
Well, yeah, it's a nice idea, but will I grow as an artist if that would happen?
In a very general sense, it's a pleasure to see your work on GI Joe, and as much as you want it to continue, I hope it does.
We'll see. Yeah, the comics industry is a weird animal sometimes. So I'm hoping the Joe fans enjoy the book as much as they did with Chris's stuff, and Chris will be back. So I mean, as far as I know, Chris will be back. After my 5 issues, I think. So it would be kind of cool to have like a 5 issue story arc each one of us. That would be very cool. So hopefully the fans will dig it, and I'm trying my best.
And hopefully, we or some fans can meet you in person at a convention in the next year or so, as your GI Joe stuff is out there
Mhm.
to greet you in person and perhaps look at your art up close.
Well, I did a show in Lexington, Kentucky, a month or so back. I mean, it was shortly after it was announced I was going to be on the book, and I had 2 or 3 people have GI Joe sketches done. So yeah, it like I said, it's impressive to see the fan base, and it's very cool to see how passionate they are about that project. So yeah, and so even before a book came out, I had people asking for sketches. So it's very cool to see.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll encounter many more when you're at Heroes Con and get your GI Joe pencil ready.
Yep. Yep. I'll probably have to keep a stack of like reference, just make sure I keep the costumes right too. So
There are a couple of really organized fans who commission art and sketches who will bring their own folder or 3 ring binder with
right.
reference. Perhaps you have met one of these thoughtful people already.
Well, not necessarily with GI Joe, but yeah, for other characters. Because a lot of times when I'm asked to do sketches at shows, it's not even necessarily characters I've drawn before. It's characters they want to see me draw. So, and a lot of them are fairly obscure characters. So yeah, they keep their ref with them. So they have something to show.
All right,
So,
just to loop
oh,
just to loop back around and tie up that thought. Many years ago, I wanted to see you draw GI Joe, and now I have.
there we go. Nice way to bring it all together. Hey, thank you so much, guys.
you're off to a good start, and look forward to seeing more issues and digging into them, and hopefully, we can catch up again down the line when you're a few more in. Excellent. Thanks so
All
much for
right.
joining
Thank you
us.
so much.
Thank you, Paul.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Is there a place on the internet or social media where people can find you or follow you and look at your stuff?
Well, I'm like Bigfoot as far as social media goes, you know. So, but I mean, I've got my website paulpelletierart.com, and if people email me through there, I always try to answer every email that comes through as soon as I can too. So, but that's about it. I mean, I don't do the Twitter thing. I don't do Facebook or anything like that. But that's probably the best way to get in touch with me is through my website. It's terrible. Someday I'll have to do more social media stuff, but for now,
If you are a busy freelancer and you're getting work and editors can find you,
yep,
I think for now you're set.
yep. There we go.
If you're getting the 20 pages a month done at the moment, if you're on Twitter, Facebook, that might come down a bit. So keep at it.
Yeah,
Or just pencil more loosely like Kirby and let your inkers do more of the work.
there we go. So start learning how to draw with my feet and both hands. So produce more work, keep more inkers busy. So there we go.
All right. Thank you again, Paul.
Hey, thank you guys. All right, take care.
So, Tim, that was good talking to Paul right up to the minute with the issue being out. His first issue on his first issue out on the book with a few more to come. So that's exciting stuff.
Yeah, it's fun to be timely. I like our episodes to be timeless, so we're not like pulling out, flip phones from 5 years ago, or talking about Christmas, right? And then someone's listening to an episode in July. But it's also very cool to, the moment an issue is out, be able to talk about it and its artist.
So I think we will leave it there for now. Hope you enjoyed that chat with Paul, and apologize for my microphone playing up during that episode. Hopefully not too distracting. Join us next time on the Real American Hero episodes of Talking Joe, when we will be talking about the detail of this very issue that Paul has drawn, issue 306. And at Talking Joe, we're also covering the Energon universe. Next time on Talking Joe Energon universe, we will be talking Cobra Commander with the concluding issue 5, which is out on the 15th of May. Hopefully, we will be talking to the artist Andrea Milana as well. The Energon universe will continue with Destro and Scarlet before too very long. And we will also be covering the latest issues of G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, as they come out. The next issue is 15th of May as well. So all of that and more as the Skybound era of G.I. Joe continues. Yes, on Talking Joe. You can find us at talkingjoe.co.uk. That is our website that will point you in the directions of all of the places you can find us, like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and more. We are also on Patreon at patreon.com/talkingjoe. So a big thanks to all of our backers: Richard, Sam, Jay, Bill, Christopher, Justin, Rob, Brian, Shane, Ryan, Simon, and Chris, who are all getting early access to episodes as well as some exclusive content. Tim, what about you? Where can people find you when you're not talking to me about G.I. Joe?
Video essays at youtube.com at Atomic Abe, that comic book store I mentioned, and I write about G.I. Joe at my blog, arealamericanbook.com.
Excellent stuff. So, all of that said and done, I think we are done. But remember that
nobody beats Talking Joe, an international podcast.
Fantastic. Laters.